Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Glickman. I'm the president and CEO of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the museum for one of our signature programs this season, featuring internationally renowned artist Andy Goldsworthy, in conversation with Molly Donovan, Curator of Contemporary Art at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Tonight, we'll be treated to a rich discussion of Andy's new book, the arc of his work, and the lasting impact of some of his most stunning projects. The museum is incredibly fortunate to be home to Andy Goldsworthy's Garden of Stones. In 2003, Andy, Holocaust survivors, and the families of survivors planted saplings that would grow from stones. The garden is a testament to those whose lives grew from the most difficult of circumstances. It calls on us to remember and to carry our remembrance into the future. Reflecting the museum's mission to serve as a living memorial, it will be cared for by generations to come. Andy has said, and I quote, "Amidst the mass of stone, the trees will appear as fragile, vulnerable flickers of life, an expression of hope for the future." I invite you all to visit and revisit this sacred space. In the garden, we are reminded of the struggles and experiences of individuals. Contemplating the individual lives that were brutally cut short or changed forever in the Holocaust is an act of resistance against the Nazis' attempts to dehumanize and destroy the Jewish people. In honoring the perseverance of survivors, the garden insists that we recognize their dignity and humanity. Visible from almost every floor within the museum, the garden confronts us with the responsibility and provides the space that we need to fulfill it. It is truly a privilege to have its creator with us tonight. Thank you, Andy, for the gift you've given this museum, and thank you for returning to our stage for this special evening. Tonight, we are live streaming this program, and so we welcome those from near and far who are participating with us online. I also want to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Andy and Molly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I just wanted to thank the staff at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, particularly Laura Salvatore for her support, and the support of the staff at Gallery Lalong, Lindsay Dankworth, Mary Sabatino, and Liz Bowers, who really helped us shape this presentation today. So thank you for all your coordination and bolstering in order to get us here. And I'm grateful for the invitation to speak with Andy tonight, and I'm also really pleased for the opportunity to revisit his work anew on the occasion of the publication of his new book, Projects, which is related to a publication I did myself on the projects, the Andy Goldsworthy project at the National Gallery. So it's an opportunity to go deeper into that idea. And I have as the image, the introductory image, an ephemeral work, but what we're going to be studying and talking about more tonight are his more permanent works, which he has termed projects. And so I just want to talk around that a little bit. A couple weeks ago, Andy and I, just to kind of catch up before the talk, had a phone conversation, and he said to me, he made this, he's filled with great poetic quotes, but this one really stuck. He said, "I'm a lot happier on a hill or in a house." It was in the context of talking about various things, but I just want to kind of unpack that idea a little bit. So if we take the image of a figure on a hill, a solitary, autonomous figure, we can kind of conjure up ideas of romantic painting and Caspar David Friedrich's Rücken figure with his back to the viewer, looking out on this grand landscape. And I've always thought your work really debunked that romanticism, that your work was more about nature, man is nature, rather than man against the backdrop of nature. And I think your rain shadows do a lot to debunk that myth. But the image of you in a house is more about what I imagine we're going to be talking about in regard to the projects, because it puts you in a picture with others, cooperating, and that's really what I think of as the essence of your projects. They're these cooperative works where you're laboring with others over time to complete them. There's very much a building. And many of these projects invoke the idea of the house, or the house-like, or housing, something that houses some entity, natural entity often. But they're not in completely familiar terms. They're quasi-familiar. They bring the familiar into the unfamiliar and vice versa. And so in combining the familiar and the unfamiliar, or the concealed, so you're revealing something that is concealed. In this combination, it meets Freud's definition of the uncanny. So we're really talking about the uncanny, or the unheimlich, which is what Freud's term was, which is actually concealed, but it's also unhomely. So it's about the home. So it circles back to this idea of home, familiarity, and it's about introducing the uncomfortable. So there's a surreal aspect to these projects that I see in the work, bringing the unfamiliar into the familiar and vice versa. So that's the framework that I'm wondering if we can think about a little bit. And given the surreal aspect, the uncanny, as opposed to the figure in the landscape. So the homely and the uncanny. So, as was discussed, Andy and I worked together with the whole team, his team and my team, at the National Gallery, and Andy made this incredible work, roof, in this long, narrow space, and it was about this work that the Andy Goldsworthy Project publication was written. And until I put this slide presentation together for tonight, I wasn't really connecting in my mind this work with the work here. But look at this long, narrow space. Look at the composition. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. So this work, the Garden of Stones, precedes the National Gallery's work by about a year. And I was lucky to be here for the christening of this work in the fall of 2003, which really whetted and deepened my interest to work.
Well, there's a third work in the St. Louis Art Museum, which is also a long courtyard space. And they're interesting. It's an interesting kind of context. They almost become like holes in the building. So you kind of drop through them to the ground below, particularly St. Louis, which is a group of arches that were originally intended to be made from stone from the site when they excavated the site for the new extension by David Chipperfield. The stone turned out to be not the good enough quality to make the work, but the connection was still there, and I used the same bedrock, the nearest quarry to the place. And I do like that. That way it becomes a landscape within the building, below the building, as if it's risen up out of the building, as a reminder that these things are below our feet.
So
That's it.
putting these stones in a museum, I'm wondering about that act, that gesture, that here's a wonderful detail. And then the unfamiliar, seeing this beautiful life coming from what one thinks of as this inert mass of these boulders, the unfamiliar. And this is an image that you've talked about. And so part of where I'm getting this connection to surrealism is related to your book, in which you discuss with Tina Fisk certain ideas, in particular Magritte's Invisible World, and ideas about these masses in interior spaces.
Yeah, I have a strange relationship with Magritte because I don't particularly like the painting quality of a Magritte. It's a very cold, kind of illustrative expression of an idea. You know, it's an illustration of an idea, but the ideas are so close to how I see the world. So I'm perplexed by my relationship with Magritte, and I quite enjoy that. But I find, like Paul Nash, who is also considered a surrealist painter. I mean, his paintings that become of the territory of dreams don't interest me, but his perception of the British landscape and the underlying structure and sculptural quality of the British landscape is one that I feel a great affinity with. I also like the painting quality of Paul Nash, but I see these things. They are real, not surreal for me. They are real.
Right. And this discomfort is part of that uncanny, the unheimlich.
Yeah, the purpose of the house, you mentioned the house earlier, and I think I was just on the way back from having worked on a building on top of a hill in Yorkshire. And I am attracted to buildings because they're recognizable places where people have been. So you're working with the human presence and the human context, which I'm much more comfortable working with than being in some place that is devoid of human presence. I like that sense of my footprint being in the footprint of previous people, that kind of context. And but the works that I make are, they turn on their head this sense of the house being a place of sanctuary and comfort, and you can walk in there. It can be occupied by a stone, so you can't actually fit into the house without uncomfortably moving around the stone. And it's very dark. It's quite threatening. I have another work I have two works near Edinburgh in Jupiter, which is an art collection of outdoor sculpture. One of them.
We're going to get to
Are we
those.
going to show that?
Yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk about it now or then?
No. But I can remind you, though, while you're talking about this, a line from your recent film, Leaning into the Wind, the intro sequence where you're walking into a home in Brazil, and it looked, was it abandoned? Was it an abandoned home?
It is. It's an adobe house. No one had lived there for a long time, and there's a really, that feeling of going into a place where people have been, where they are no longer. There's a sense of their presence. The floor was dirty and dusty, and there was a spot of light on the floor from a hole in the roof. It was like this burnt white hole in the building. And I just began to kick up the dust. And this became a whole thing. And I managed to create this. It felt that it was like a lightsaber. It was amazing, you know, this light. And there was a broom on the floor that I used to sweep the dust. So I was sweeping the floor with a broom that the people who swept the floor many years ago had used, you know. And it was a very practical thing, but I was doing the same thing they did with this when I made
And
the work.
the image, if you haven't seen the film, it's fantastic. The image, Andy is literally animating the light through the dust, kicking up the dust into the path of this beam of light. And what I'm reminded of is what you said. I'm slightly uncomfortable looking into other people's lives. Like you were trespassing almost, and very sensitive to that which went before. So it's a sense of discomfort in the home.
There is that. That actually, this is how the projects often begin. You know, I go to a place, I find somewhere, and I start getting a feeling for the place through engaging with it, trying to understand it. And the proposal that I made for that particular house, it was never realized, was I was going to re-roof the building but leave a hole. It's about 4 or 5 rooms, so at this particular time of the day, the shaft of light would come into each room. There'd be a layer of dust over the floor, and you could go in and make the lines, you know, so there'd be lines in each room. And obviously the dust there's a certain health issue with going into creating these dusty things. So I thought, oh, I could get one of those, you know, they used to do dust masks that was like a pad with a metal thing that fit over your ears. Well, I could have these made so that when you came out, you'd have this dusty circle, which would then be a work. So you'd create a work by the mask that was protecting you from the dust. And I mean, sometimes it really hurts when the ideas don't get realized. And I hope that it's
Knowing you, it will.
Well, but I don't kind of hawk them. I don't kind of. I'm not a Christo that will get this focus and I love the tenacity that Christo has for these projects. But I'm not like that. I'll just drop it and go and do something else, and then. But it'll be there. It'll, you know, and eventually the gallery along know this more than anything. Somehow this idea will crop up again at the right moment, the right time, and I quite like that sense of waiting for this moment to happen. I've got a few like that. So, I think. Sorry, I'm jumping back. This is what happens when you set up a PowerPoint, but then we're meant to be speaking spontaneously. This is what Andy wanted. He didn't want to plan anything out. So all my plans go by the wayside. But this was the conversation that we were having when Molly said, what are we going to talk about? And I said, I don't want to know. You know,
right. He said, I want you to surprise me, which I have to say, circling back to reinforce this argument about surrealism reminds me of Andre Breton's Objective Chance, where he talks about how chance events involved in making a sculpture through the unconscious selection of the objects. He said that he found that the sculpture was elevated. It was better when above the sculpture made with conscious deliberation. And he wrote something that reminds me very much of something I've heard you say and write. It became clear that the object I had so much wanted to contemplate before had been constructed outside of me, very different, very far beyond what I could have imagined. I don't know if you've ever read Breton, but that really made me think of things you've said. But to circle back to my planned PowerPoint, this Mount Joy tree folds, of course, in Cumbria is part of your sheepfolds project and related to, was a kind of precursor to the Garden of Stones.
Yeah, the sheepfold project was a fairly early project, kind of pivotal in that it was quite ambitious. The idea was to rebuild 100 sheepfolds as artworks, and it never really materialized. It never kind of came to fruition. There was a few interesting works in there, but it's been such a breeding ground for ideas, which, you know, this is an example, and led to works such as the Garden of Stones, but also the whole interest in the house, this container, this place where sheep and farmer with his sheep worked. It was so ingrained with the memory of the activity of farming and the sense of the shelter this gave in contrast to the openness of the surrounding landscape. And there was one particular sheepfold that was an old barn that had been reduced to a sheepfold, in which I placed a stone. And that was the first time I thought, oh, that would have been more interesting if I'd put the stone in the house. You know, and then actually it didn't quite work like that, because the work that was eventually had a big stone in it, I built the house around the stone. I found this big glacial boulder. So it's had some interesting permutations since then. But it was a fabulous project. It was a very important project, even though the works in it weren't the best that I've done.
What kind of tree is this?
That's a rowan tree. It's a mountain ash, which it survives in difficult conditions, similar to the oak, the dwarf oak that are planted in the Garden of Stones.
So I think it's very interesting that your first commissioned work in the United States was commissioned by collectors who have had a history of collecting surrealist art at a certain point. So putting these unfamiliar things together.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Because this is Joel and Sherry Mallon who are here and have supported me since I was very little. And they're like my American parents. Well, they are my American parents. And yes, their collection has had, and at different times, quite a strong surrealist element to it, which has always perplexed me, to be honest, because Sherry and Joel's love of or interest is a very sort of gut, and it's a strong emotional relationship that we have. My big but the moment Sherry comes to see any new work is like a test. And she has this really visceral sort of reaction to it. And, I never know which way it's going to go. But the surrealist works have that very kind of cold, almost, that is, for me, in contradiction to that, because that's the same thing that I have with surrealist painting. I just feel the coldness of the treatment of the material. It feels so distant, whereas my engagement with material is the work. It comes out of the feeling, the touch, and the physical, not this thing in my head.
Right.
Well, it is as well, but not they're connected, very strongly connected.
Would you maybe allow that your work is surrealist? It's like walking into a painting. It's on the outside, not the inside. So it's this interior, exterior.
I think there's a strong feeling of walking into the landscape, of these being windows, like the work here in the National Gallery. You're looking into something that is there. I've shown At its very best, my work shows me what is there. It's not an invention, it's a revelation. It's a moment of clarity, not of mystery.
And then the clarity that has come with the progress and the degradation of the materials in the case of the wood through wall, the dead tree that has decayed and the wall has gone with it.
It has, which has been very interesting. This was made when I was quite young, and a few years seemed like a long, long time then. You know, so, we'll just make it, it'll be fine, it's wood, and it soon decays. So I, as the artist, and Joel and Sherry as the collectors, have had to deal with this decay, and it's been a fabulous challenge to try and, it's gone from, let's make another work, to, no, we have to respect the decay. And it currently stands as we're going to the place. It's still, I consider this to always, at all times, be a work, a full, complete work of art in its decay. And would be very loath to do anything with that with that site. And now when I make works that are likely to decay, the decay is written into the idea, is part of the work. And that comes from, I hope, a sense of maturity and also understanding better what I do. But I am so grateful for this work, for having taught me that.
And so here the wood, you know, the trees dead, as opposed to the trees in Garden of Stones. And so the weight of the wall takes, you know, it's a combination. Entropy takes place. And so we're just seeing what we're looking at in these wood and stone related works that Andy has made is he seems to deepen his attention and our understanding of the different things that can happen when these two materials come together. So this is another work where...
Yeah, and it also should be said that they are a leap of faith and a leap into the unknown, and there are a lot of uncertainties about this particular work. Unusually was in an exhibition and then was installed in this location that was prone to flooding, as you can see on the image. It's in France. And the trees rotted away very quickly. And the person on whose land it's made struggles with that, you know. And I think it's really, really beautiful. This tree is disappearing, but it's leaving the holes in where it was once there. And I feel a great reluctance to fill the work, to do another work in it. But on the other hand, I quite like the idea of put another layer of work in there to decay. And, you know, so I think there are elements that I can perhaps come out the other end of that with a better understanding and to be able to make works that actually use that, you know, and make more sense of it. And it was also interesting because the work was it was bought from the exhibition because a father saw the work before he died. And so his looking into this work is, I'm always, you know, I think about that. So the idea of these things being there, but having been there, and the presence being there, but you can't actually see them, is, I think, really deep in the spirit of the work.
And then all this growth around.
Yeah, it's a fabulous sense of change that occurs in this place, yeah. Beautiful.
So another tree-related work. Very different in scale and orientation.
This is in the Presidio at San Francisco. and they were cutting down a lot of the timber a lot of the trees were planted by the military in the late 1800s. And they're all reaching a point where they're all of the same age. And really you want a forest that is a mixture of ages. So they're removing a lot of trees. And I wanted to they asked me if I could work with some of the timber coming out of the Presidio. So I made a work from the felled trees on the site where they grew. It's a spire. And it's in a very prominent place, unusually for me to make a work that, like, look at me, I'm on this hill kind of sculpture. I'm much more interested in inserting them into the landscape. There's a certain arrogance about claiming the top of a place, you know. But I wanted to use that because people would see it every day, and then because it was planted around it with the same tree, it is disappearing inside the forest. So it'll turn from being this very extrovert sculpture into a very introverted sculpture. And that children, possibly children who go there now and stand in front of it in this open space, well, it's no longer open, stood in front of it in that open space, will return in their 80s when it's a forest. That appeals to me enormously, you know. So it is marking change. And I think that's, you know, I talk about them being permanent, these works, just because it's a word to help to distinguish them from the very ephemeral works. But they're not really permanent. In fact, because they are about the future, they are more about change, are as much about change as the ephemeral work. It's just a different time scale. And I think it's very important that, you know, I love the moment of a work, when I make a throw or something with leaves that blows away. But to understand time properly, I have to understand the moment and the past, but also the future, and make works that don't try and control what's going to happen, but have a life, an unpredictable life in the future.
It occurs that the word project is not just a noun, it's a verb, to project.
That's great. That's really great.
All right.
Because I have to say, the reason, you know, titles of books or titles of works even are really tricky. I'm not a big kind of Orpheus 3, you know what I mean, titler. I'm more of when I'm making a work, I like to try and... The best titles often come because people describe the work and the construction, the whatever, and then that becomes the title. So it comes out of the language of the project. And you called the book, you know, the Andy Goldsworthy Project. And I kind of like that. So that's why I called my book Projects. But I'd never thought to project.
Yeah.
That is just amazing. That's made the whole night worthwhile for me.
Well, I'm so glad.
That's great. See, I think those simple insights are just, that's great. Anyway, sorry.
You were all here to witness this. It was good. Okay, we got to keep moving. So there are all these reversals, right? You were just talking about extrovert, and now we're introverted in this interior space with this oak dome over our heads in France. I can keep going.
Yeah.
Do you want me to keep moving forward?
If you want, yeah. It's behind a terrace wall, so
Right.
all you see is a little door in a wall. Then you go down the steps, and you're into this chamber of wood.
Yeah, you can see here's the entry point.
Yeah.
Now this is such an interesting work. Can you describe how you imagined this coming into being?
Right, so the work that happened before this is a stone coppice. It's in Scotland. And a coppice woodland is one where the trees have been cut and then allowed to grow back up and cut again. So it's a way of cropping the forest without killing the trees. It's a very beautiful sort of process. And the trees and woodlands become very, very old. And they throw up these, they're almost like hands, you know, waiting for something to be put in them. And so I knew the place. But prior to making this work, I did a work in the same place where I made a house. And I had seen the bedrock was quite close to the surface of although it wasn't a particularly stony place, they've been doing some construction work, and I see the bedrock was right below the surface of the ground. So I did a geological dig and just removed the soil to reveal this landscape, the stone landscape below. And I love that idea of just taking something away to see what's there rather than putting an object in there. It's a very, very different way of dealing. And then I built a house over the bedrock. So you open the door and the bedrock's there. And because it's so, there's no stone around, people can't believe it's the bedrock. They think I've fabricated and ask me, how did I do such convincing stonework? And the Garden of Stones is starting to have that quality too. The trees look as if they're somehow not real, you know, the way they're welded to the top. But anyway, when I was making the bedrock and excavating, there were no trees on the place I was where I'd selected, but there had been a tree that you could see where it had been because it had eaten the stone. There was a hole where the tree had kind of pulled and torn at the bedrock, and the root will digest stone. Trees eat stone, which is, you know, we have this idea that the trees are the weaker, the more gentle, but the idea is trees being these things that pull pavements and buildings apart. It's a very powerful expression of the strength, vigor, and energy of nature and trees. So this led to the coppice, where the trees, the stones are put into the trees, and as if the trees are pulling up the stones from the ground. And over time, when they're first put in, it looks like I'm burdening the tree. But it doesn't take long for the tree to start to grip the stone in this vice-like.
That's what this looks like.
Yeah,
Is that what's
exactly
happening?
that.
It's kind of hugging it.
So it changes from being, you know, the tree is in control. The tree is, you know, and I like that tension between the tree and stone. Yeah, this is great. I love this.
The coppice room.
So the coppice woodland, because it needs to be cut to continue, so I cropped some of the trees. So I had this material, and if you go back a slide, there was this little room next to a wall garden. It was derelict. In fact, there was a washing machine in there when I went, you know, proposed to work. So I put a roof back on this room, and it is tiny. It's the tiniest space. It goes from about here to the screen, and is probably as wide from myself to Molly. So it's not a big space. But I've placed the trees so they become more dense as you go into the room. And you can get lost in there. And it's quite a frightening space to be in. You don't know if anybody's next to you. You could get, and
you see,
yeah.
Andy's
No, I'm just kind of wandering through. People disappear into it. Some people won't go into it.
is it there an illusion? Is it?
No, it's just what you could, if you fill a room with these things, it just makes it, and it's very dark, of course. All you get is the light from the window. But when I made it, I realized that I hope someday to be able to make this on a really big scale. I mean, a really big scale. So big that people who go in there, you'd have to put a tracker on them. And you just see people, and the idea of this building containing a forest. You know, the interesting thing is that, you know, I make these works. I did one in Madrid, in Spain, where I used timber that was on its way to be made into paper. So I just borrowed it. Huge installation with this wood. People were furious that I'd used this wood and killed all these trees. And I said at a public talk I gave, I didn't kill these trees, you did. They're your newspapers. They're your particle board. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's this denial of this, our relationship with forests. And if I'd made the work out of newspaper or plywood, no one would have cared. You know, what's this? You know, what are my feet on? It's trees. I'm standing on trees. Nature is here. It's around me. So the idea of this building containing the forest is, for me, a fact. So I don't know if I dare say it, but there's a possibility it may be made at some point. Discussions have begun.
All right.
Yeah. Nearby-ish. Early days. But I'm really excited about it. There is a lot of ash trees are dying in America because of the ash blight. So it's producing this enormous amount of timber. So, and I'll say no more.
Okay. Do you know this painting?
No.
Ah. It's another Magritte.
Oh, no, I've never seen that one.
I was looking for a Magritte that had trees in it to go together with your boulder.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It's really bizarre.
It's really weird. It's not right.
But it occurred to me that there was something going on spatially that was related to your Coppice room. This condensing of space. And anyway, we can keep going. I just wanted, this is the last surrealist mention I'm making. I just had to throw it in there. Had to ask
It does make me
you.
uncomfortable.
That's its point.
Yes, I know. I do enjoy discomfort. Discomfort is really important.
It's the tension. It's the
No,
inherent
no,
tension. I think it's all in all of your works. I think I see it in all of your works in stone and wood, and that's why I'm bringing all this up. I think that combination is inherently fraught. There's a tension in there, and this work, which has been formative for so many in terms of understanding and coming to know your work, the Storm King wall, myself included. You know, those trees went up on either side of a wall that was once there, and then you wove a serpentine line among them. And just the idea of continuity in Andy's work and the return, this constant return to a place, change and growth, even new works, and a new system around which to organize a set of ideas or work. 5 men, 17 days, 15 boulders, 1 wall.
That was a good title.
How did you come up with those set of constraints?
Well, you know, one of the challenges of making the projects is trying to figure out how long it's going to take. You know, there's always that problem, and I never really know. I try to be as precise as I can, but it's about something that's you cannot be. The poor gallery have to deal with this all the time when they're trying to do budgets and what have you. And there are so many unknowns. The commission by me is a leap of faith on the part of the person who's commissioning it. And it's not for the faint-hearted. It's an unnerving process for everybody concerned. And all I can say is I will work as hard as I can to make this in the least amount of time or whatever. But it was very liberating to make a work. Well, we're just going to, rather than say it's going to be this length, we're going to work for 17 days, and that's what you get. So the work is 17 days. How many men? How many tons of stone? You know, so that was.
How does this relate to the Storm King wall?
It's actually connected to the Storm King wall. It's not connected, but it's in part of the same network as the Storm King wall. And when I first went to Storm King doing making proposals, I typically will make several proposals for a price when I've asked to make a work. And to the right-hand side of the right image, there was a wood. And I knew there were boulders in the area, and I made a proposal for that wood that is a kind of a stone-walled field inside the wood that would be full of boulders and the trees. Then over time, the Bill Rutherford cleared that forest, that wood, and all these boulders came out in the process, and they dumped them on top of this old wall. So I then rebuilt the old wall around these old boulders. I would not have taken the boulders and placed them. I think it was that element of chance in it that produced this work. This particular piece I am not maintaining. The wall around the trees is maintained. Maintenance might be the wrong word. I would say rebuilding a dry stone wall is a very important part of dry stone walling. It's an act of renewal and nourishment, not just conservation of the work. So it's a deeper quality to it than just repair. But this one I'm going to let go and decay again, because I quite like the idea of the wall being just a pile of stones around the large stones eventually. Do you really?
I love this work. It's just a revelation and a folly to come upon this work when you're walking in the Presidio and there's this line of felled, are they eucalyptus? No.
They're eucalyptus, and the eucalyptus has this very sinuous and, it can be quite curved in its growth form. So the trees that were felled or had fallen, we collected those trunks that would make the line, and then the fact it's there now, people walk it, and they all have a different way of walking it. And
they walk on top of
some
it.
walk on top. There was a
Along.
couple going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Someone told me. And then he went to say, what are you doing? He said, well, the first one that falls off has to wash up after dinner. And this is probably the most visited work that I've ever made. It's the most socially interactive work I've ever done. And when I'm there, I was just done some recent repairs on it before I finally let it go, because it will now decay and disappear.
It will decay.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's lying on the floor. It will decay. But as what I've done is it's on sand, so it was being undermined from one side. So I wanted to firm up the side that had become eroded, so it would decay in situ, because it would become this road of rotten wood which will be quite beautiful. And it'll always be there as a work. So I'm there working, and during the day, there's people getting wedding photographs on it, there's school kids over it. It is really interesting when you release a work that takes on this whole kind of life. And then others have no life. And they just die. And then others like this just have this wonderful existence. And you never know when you make it what kind of life it will have. And that's one of the beauty. And I think I've said this is people think that the permanent works are strong, solid, and indestructible. They're not. They're so vulnerable. Vulnerable more so than the ephemeral work, which is intended to just go. These have a very poetic and beautiful fragility because they're about the future and it's unknown. Anyway, that was waffling on. What did you want?
Different time of year, just the chromatic shifts in the tone
and
changes.
It's such an extraordinary. It looks very sinuous and very, and I'm after something that's so effortless. The way, the effort that went in to select it, finding in the mood. It was such a challenge to do. And there was an event organized halfway through this project for people who supported it and interested in it, and they were going to come. And I've learned I should never, ever do this. Because when I'm making a work like this, all I can see is everything that's wrong with it. That's the state of mind you have to be in when you're making them. Otherwise, I'll not achieve it. So all I could talk about was how wrong it was and how awful it was. And everybody went away thinking, oh my goodness. And then when it was finished, there is an element of that too, that once complete, and then I have to go away and come back, of course, to see it as it is, and it just rises up out of the place, and I live for that. Yeah.
Well, it's very engaging, this work. It's incredibly engaging. And there is this play, this sense of play that's allowed and built in a way that other works, But I think that a lot of people love your work for its sense of play and its seeming effortlessness, although the labor that belies that is, great.
Play's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Like people used to say, well, they come and say it looks like fun. It's not fun.
No.
Work with me for one day and you'll find it's not fun. It's the making of the big projects are, physically very challenging, and as is the ephemeral work that I do, of course, but that is just me. But these are challenging in terms of having to have the idea realized in the first place, overcoming all the hurdles that are inevitably involved in making a work like this in a national park. It's in a place that is deeply loved by the locals, so you don't know if you're going to get lynched or loved, especially in a place like San Francisco where everyone, and New York, because everybody has an opinion and everybody's opinion counts, and you've got... you really can, and you overcome that, and then the physical problems of making the work, and I have a fabulous team of people that I work with, and this is very, very different to the ephemeral works, which is just me, which is why I love doing that. That I need to do that. I mean, I've just been in New Haven, where we're looking at doing an exhibition at the Yale Center for British Art, and during the day I'm looking at sites and meeting people, and a lot of discussions, and it's snowing. It's like driving me mad. It's snowing, and I'm having discussions and looking at things. It's snowing, and I don't know. And the end of the day, get back to the hotel, and I go out. and I made these works on the streets. And it was like this, you know.
A release.
And I'm very grateful that I have these two sides of my practice. And I think that it's like, sometimes I think I'm a little like two people or two artists, but they make complete sense when brought together.
I think there's a broad spectrum in relationship to the ephemeral and the so-called permanent. There's a broad, I think that's what you're saying along the way. Even the projects have, each project has its own place in the spectrum of time. So.
But if I think out of the two, I just couldn't do without the ephemeral work. Then I would drain up. You know, that's the food.
Well, and something that I think was argued earlier, that the projects have to be understood in tandem with the ephemeral. That it's one project, in a way.
Mm. And
Your
sometimes
work.
they do happen at the same time, and my crew have got used to me sort of lying down when it rains. And the rain shadows that I've done, and I video, they're on films now, so I just set a camera up, lay down, and so then we have these really great videos of the whole construction carrying on, and machines going by, and I'm just laying there in the rain, and then at some point I get up, and no one bothers, you know. It's a nice thing that they accept that.
So, cairns came back.
Well, I can't, yeah. I think every artist has something that they repeat. And repetition can be interesting, but it can be dangerous because of the comfort of the form. And people love these. That's not a good reason to make one. So for a while back, a few years ago, I decided to make no more cans. And since then, I've made 3 cans.
Is this the first of the 3?
I think that's the first of the,
first
I'm
one.
not going to make any more cans, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's important that they're made in that spirit, because they have to be doing something differently to, you know, there's to be a real reason for it, not just because I can make them or whatever, you know.
Do you want to describe?
This is
what this
in
is?
Australia, and on top
Focus
of the
on this.
cairn is a Strangler Fig Sapling. The
So
Strangler
related to the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
it certainly
Garden of
is,
Stones.
yeah. So it may look small, that tree, and pretty fragile, but in fact, it will consume the sculpture. It will swallow it up over time. And in fact, on the left-hand side is the site, and it was a site of where a strangler fig had fallen. So then the little tree came from the old tree, a little sapling. And and then I make these drawings that kind of anticipate, because I like to put it out there that I think this is maybe what happened, and
then see.
And then see.
To project.
To project. To be proved wrong. All right. Yeah.
And then, so the tree and the tree, there was a tree fell in, going back to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And in this instance, am I right that the building in which the tree was going to be suspended or inserted in the ceiling, it had to be retrofit into the building? Is that right? You couldn't change the building. You couldn't attach the work to the building.
This is a historic, a very old building. It's gunpowder. It used to store gunpowder for the military at the Presidio in San Francisco. It's the oldest building on the. And interestingly, in America, you have a real aversion to putting any fixings into old and new buildings sometimes. It's like this, you can't do that. Whereas in Europe, I mean, we'll drill into things, you know. I mean, it's just like, that's what we do, you know, in Italy. But here it's a no-no. So, and that's a problem for me sometimes, because I you know, the fix things into them like their toe holes, finger holes to, you know, get into the building. So we had to build a framework with inside it. So there was a lot of engineering went into doing that, yeah.
So all the invisible parts that you don't
Yeah, but
see.
we didn't take
Seamless.
the roof. We didn't take the roof off or anything. So the tree had to kind of be squeezed through this very narrow entrance. That was for me the most beautiful part of it. This kind of the way the tree, the building just took like a boa constrictor swallowing a big thing. It just sucked it in. That was great.
And all the same earth on mud
Yeah, it was the clay from the
Clay
Presidio,
from the Presidio.
Wrapped around it.
around
yeah.
the ceiling and the tree itself. So not differentiating the tree from
No.
its environs, all one environment. So speaking of drawings, this was a very complicated project that required a lot of drawings, as I understand it.
Yeah, the drawing in probably the best drawings I do are like that line of trees. That for me is the essence of drawing. It's a line. And then there is drawing that is describing what I want to make. Proposal drawings are important to show, to give some idea of what I'm going to make. I also have an explanation. But more recently, the last few years, the projects have been so complicated and challenging that there is a different type of drawing has emerged, which is a drawing that occurs as the sculpture is being made. So the drawing is being updated as I'm making the work. So the work is making the drawing. And I do that because I need to know what direction I'm heading in with the sculpture. And latterly, I've actually we've scanned these drawings and I put them onto banner material, which you can get at FedEx or wherever these places. So that's a great material to have on site because it's waterproof. And then I'll work on that one, and there'll come a point when I'll scan that one. So I have a whole series of these quite large drawings sometimes that are.
What kind of material did you say?
It's like banner material. You put it in, you know, when you want to put a banner outside the museum,
Yeah.
in the gallery, that stuff. You get it.
Tyvek.
Yeah, that kind
Got
of
it.
stuff. Yeah, and it's great, you know. So I work onto those, and I think the progression in those. So the drawing has become a part of the process and the work, which is.
What's the lifespan of Tyvek? What do the conservators say about that? We don't know. We'll have to.
There you go. It lasts a very long time. There you
Okay,
are. And
okay.
I obviously was thinking about that when I chose it as a material. Yeah, with all the Tipex that I use on it too, you know.
Right.
And the
The
they're not.
Sharpies.
I think the idea of a drawing disappearing is such a beautiful one. I mean, there's no way is it ever going to you know, like the drawing that had all that on is now gone, and you have to.
Well, we can take photographs of the drawing,
You
and it will live forever
you can do
through
that.
photographic
Yeah.
imagery. So this is the site of the culvert cairn that demanded all these drawings, unfinished on the left, and you know it's an interesting work. Culverts are kind of hidden spaces, and the water is absent for most of the year. If I'm right?
Yeah, this is in California.
It's in a dry part of the world, so there's an absence-presence tension going on. Sometimes the work is activated, sometimes the work is empty, but a complicated work in the end.
This is the work that nearly broke me, and was
I
a.
don't believe that.
No, it was tough. The stone is we call it whinstone in Scotland. It's the same it's like the blue stone you have here in New York, and it's
Granite?
The what?
Is it granite?
No, it's a sandstone, but it's been under tremendous pressure and heat. So it's very, very hard, but it's fractured. So I'll spend days cutting and chiseling a particular stone, and it does just fall apart. And that happened a lot. So and when I proposed the work, I guess I thought it was going to be quite a small piece, and then someone showed me a video of with this creek when it's in flood, just before I was about to start. So I had to beef up the work a little bit. Thank goodness they showed me, so it took, I don't know, it took about 3-4 times as long as it should have done. It was so difficult. And thankfully the clients were okay, but it was the toughest, it was really, really tough. But because of that work, that released a whole, works after that were technically of a level that I'd not been able to do, wouldn't have known how to do. So it was a bit of a trial, but it was an important, very pivotal work in that respect.
So in my caption, I wrote preamble. So you're literally walking over the old wall before you made this seriously laborious work called Passage. I mean, the amount of lifting and cutting and placing of these boulders looks just monumental.
Yeah,
the scale, the work involved.
It actually wasn't so bad.
No?
No.
It just looks
I know, but
heavy.
it wasn't that bad. I think we did it in 4 weeks, was it? 6 weeks. I don't know how we did that.
This is the work.
This is the work, yeah.
So beautiful. And this is what's on the cover of the book.
So essentially it was that wall split apart so that you enter the wall. And that's what I'm always trying to do with everything I make, enter the material, the place, to get beneath the surface of it. And it's actually quite a somewhat threatening space. I made sure it was a bit tight when you go through.
So it's
and the walls are 6, 7, or 8 feet high and it goes cold as you go into it too. So it's a very and walls for me, there's this love of old walls. We love old walls. But they came from a time when people cleared the forest. They cut the trees, they divided property, they were about boundaries. There are often tensions at walls. So they're not always this pastoral thing. They have a tension in them. So I felt this was, and they're very human spaces. They're made by people. They have such a strong human presence. So to put a person inside the wall seems the most sensible thing to do.
This is you.
It is me.
And it looks like you're at an angle, like you can't
walk you can't
straight through. So there is this built-in discomfort and kind of...
Yeah, I have a plan to do a work like this. I'm not prone to repeating things, as I've already said, unless there's a kind of real imperative to do that. But I'm making one that will be like a breakwater into the sea. Well, it's an estuary in Tasmania. So the sea will come up and in and out of the passage. And it's this passage, and obviously a place like Australia where the sense of passage and arrival and departure is very integral to the place. So. And the stone, we split it with plugs and feathers. So you drill holes and then you put these chisels that pop the stone. It splits the stone. So it's a very, it's quite a beautiful process, this splitting. And the stones came from either the wall or from a pile of stones that a local contractor had been pulling out of the fields, and the stones being granite, like the stones here in the garden stones are glacially deposited. So they've gone on this journey and are rolling. So they bring to the sculpture a sense of passage and travel.
That's magnificent. Another tree. This one is charred, and is the actual tree charred? Is that how you weathered it?
No, the tree is burnt, as is the roof, and it was an old stone hut that I rebuilt in the valley, Rosedale in North Yorkshire, and all the buildings in this valley, buildings they eat trees, they consume trees through the fireplace, and then they disappear into the atmosphere. So to put a tree in the atmosphere. And when you go in, it's often so dark you don't even see the tree. It's just kind of hovering there, and as your eyes adjust, the tree sort of rather threateningly emerges.
Now, this drawing is maybe hard for you to see from where you are, but it's a contour of a piece of land, and it's meant to be, it's tracing a line in the according to the geography of the land. You describe it.
It is a contour line, so it's perfectly level. So it's a path, it's a line, it's a drawing, it's a path, it's a dirt track, and it's perfectly level. So where it goes is determined by the landscape, not me. So it just follows 950 up the whole way. And the journey, this
950
line,
above
feet, yeah,
sea level.
Sea level of 950.
So wherever, whatever height, you just keep.
We had a level, it was surveyed, and then we had a level also as we were working along. So it would take me into places that were problematic and difficult, but I've never made a work that's taught me more about a place than this. And that when you walk it, because you're essentially staying still in terms of elevation, the landscape moves around you. So you kind of get this sense of the rhythms and flows and changes in the landscape. It reveals a lot, and I insisted that it was a single track. It's not a garden path, and it's not to be ever covered with anything to make it look like it's to be worn by feet. And I like that if many people walk it, there is a line of people on the line. And the place will eventually become, I think it will be a place that will be open to the public. So the idea of many people on this line, you see it walking, it would be, I think they should have an event where people walk it. So there's like 100 people walking the line, so it just becomes this line of people through the landscape.
So this is one of many works in Ohio on the same property?
It is. Typically when I do a commission, I must do a commission, I'll go there and do 2 or 3 proposals. Not always. Sometimes I'm very clear about what I want to do, but other times I like to throw a little bit of element of chance out there. I mean, obviously there won't be something I'm not happy to do, else I wouldn't even give them the proposal, but I like that. And I gave, there was 6 or 7 drawings. Anyway, the person who commissioned, said he wanted to do all of them. So I've been in Ohio a lot lately, in like 2 or 3 years, which has been wonderful because you really get to know the place, the people, and the contractors there are fantastic. And then there's the Amish community who've been helping make the work, which are wonderful work. So there's been this real engine, and I produced so many. I did 4 works in the first year or something. It was just extraordinary. It was unprecedented. And this is another one, which is a tree that had broken. And there's something about that moment when a tree breaks, the violence of it. And then as it decays, it softens and it's all lost. So I wanted to preserve that moment of the break. So the broken tree has its house.
That's great.
So if you ever find, I'd love to make one in, Manhattan. If a big tree went down on street, imagine it, and a big tree crashing, then I build a house over it so you can go and sit with the house that broke. The tree that broke. It's a very, it's a very uncomfortable. And when trees, as we all know, if the trees you know well or you pass and then it's broken, it really is disturbing. This is the other one of those cairns.
This is another cairn, but it's great. It's a seed that you're using the stone and the tree in yet another different way. I mean, we could never come up with all the different ways. That's why you're the artist and we're not. And this is remarkable.
It's a plane tree, and it was cut before I made the work. I could see the stump. And it was a living stump because I wanted it to throw up trunks like the Coppice. It's in Chaumont-sur-Loire. It's an estate, a large house. It's open to the public. It's a castle, and this was in the grounds. It's known for its gardens and things. Anyway, I built the stone cairn onto the stump, and then it's beginning to throw its shoots, and eventually will grow and it's been. This is only a year. This is the first year. So it's a very vigorous because the stump has a lot of root and no branches, so it really gets going very, very, very quickly. So there are 3 of these cairns that are related to trees. The first one was the Strangler Fig, which has the roots coming from below. This one has a tree coming from above, roots from above. This has from below, and then there's one in Spain that has a tree planted in the middle of it, so it's coming from inside. So I think I've handled that now. I've done that. Got that out of the way. I'm now going to make no more cairns.
All right. So I was really so delighted to see that you had made this leaf house near your home. Other leaf works I've seen out in the world, but none near your home, and it seems like it's just another part of the tree that you're sheltering in the stone building. Do you want to talk about these?
Well, the leaf constructions
leaf works
are made with leaves, obviously. The way they're made is they use the architecture of the leaf to make the forms. And each leaf essentially is laid in the fold of another leaf, and they're pinned together with thorns. And the forms that emerge are very much about growth. The one leaf laid on another leaf is another layer that eventually becomes the form. So they've taught me an awful lot about the leaf, the architecture of the leaf, where to even collect leaves from, and all trees are not the same. And that's the beautiful thing about working with things, is that you realize that you learn so much by the making of things, that certain trees have a thicker leaf than other trees. If you collect them from the outside of the tree rather than the inside of the tree, the leaf is thicker. The time of year you pick them, the season that produces a better crop of leaves than another season. It is never always. And the whole process is one of a learning process. And I've made three groups of leaf works in my life. One is an early group is in the collection of the Henry Moore Centre for Study of Sculpture in Yorkshire. Another is in Stamford, which will be going into the Cantor collection. It's a smallish group. And they are quite complex to make. You can imagine they're quite fiddly. And I thought I'd better make a collection for me whilst I still could, and to see if my fingers could still do this, you know, and have the dexterity. I'm pleased to say that I make them far better now than I have ever done. This group of work is so much stronger and better made and more than anything I've done. But I'm not going to make any more. That's it. But this is one of the first works in my own. And then, you know, it was a small stone building that I bought, and I rebuilt the stone building, and it is now the leaf house. And it has a table, which you can't see in this image that I made, which also has a leaf work in it, so I can have meals in the leaf room. And I had my 60th birthday in there. And it was absolutely magical. It's important for me to live with them, with my own works, because I think you probably got from what we're talking about. When I make these things, the life they have is so important for me to feed off that life, and I can feed off nothing better if it's in my home place. So.
That's great. So, circle back around to today. And the Garden of Stones in its present state, happily, thriving, persevering. These are Andy's photos of the Garden of Stones today.
Yeah, it was, I mean, you know, when you have these ideas, it's 14 years ago, I think I made the work. And, you know, I felt it should work, but, you know, there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and it was a great leap of faith on the part of the Museum of Jewish Heritage to commission this piece. And it was not without its struggles, and in the first year, only one tree survived from all the trees that were planted. And the struggle that the garden has gone through is part of the work, you know. That's obviously, it's obvious, you know. And one tree only survived. And what happened was they were loved too much and overwatered, so they died. And of course, when a tree starts to wither, what do you want to do? You want to give it more water. So that they died, and then were replaced. And so to come today and seeing you know, the moment of this work is, for me, the moment when it comes to the fruition is when the whole is completely covered and the tree is welded to rock, and all you see is wood, tree, and stone. Because at that moment, at its most beautiful, the partnership between tree and stone is at the most perfect, is the moment that the tree will start to be girdled by the stone, I imagine, and then it will die. And we will leave the dead trees for a while in the garden alongside the living ones, and then over time we can remove those and plant a small tree. So there'll be small trees, dead trees, living trees. It will have that rich sense of cycle and depth. And so today, to see this actually happening, in fact, Joel and Sherry, Helen, we were having dinner last night, it was mentioned about and I think you said something, well, we'll never see it in our lifetime. Well, they're there, you know, they're actually doing it. So today, when I don't sort of, but it was an enormous thing. I mean, it was such to see them there, and it was amazing. So it was a thrill to come back to see that, and I am. all the works, they sometimes always need a guardian. They need a guardian, you know. And if they don't have one, they don't have it. The different. Molly is the guardian of the roof in the National Gallery. And you think, well, you know, it's just a stone sculpture, so what? You know, well, it doesn't need. Molly has fought fiercely for that sculpture so that it has a good life. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Now, why should she have to fight for the life of a big stone sculpture like that? Because the sculptures may be solid, but the atmosphere around that work is critical to the success of the work. So there has been a tradition in the National Gallery of covering the window that you look through into that work with a mesh and putting posters and exhibition stuff on there. So you cannot see the sculpture. It was being killed by that. And there has been this tenacious battle on Molly's part to let people see the work. So it's like a really insidious way of kind of cutting off the lifeblood to the sculpture, and then it'll just go. And there was a point 2 years ago when it was proposed to remove the sculpture. And, you know, it was initially meant to be there for 10 years, and there was talk of removing it. And I think they were surprised, because I'm the artist who can, you know, loves things just to go, actually reacted with well, I will fight for it. Because I cannot make these things without feeling a strong commitment to. If it went, then it goes, but I'm not going to fight for it whilst it's there. All I ask for was, if they do remove it, that I can be present to watch all those stones that we all lifted in, all go out, and that I make a work of the sculpture departing the place. It's not going to be moved in the foreseeable future. But that, you know, it was a very, you know, this huge sculpture in the National Gallery, the precariousness of that, you know, Molly is the reason it's still there. And this sculpture...
You're the reason it's still there.
And this work, the Garden of Stones, until we found Charles Day, who's here, who's a gardener, and his care of the stones and the trees is why they're still here. You know, they're still. And I'm so grateful that person is. They are part of that work, and seeing it today was deeply moving for me. It was amazing. It'll be. Yeah, anyway.
Well, you were talking about all the things that you learned through making your work. And I think everyone here can agree that we are so grateful to you for teaching us and for filling the gap in our understanding, our many blind spots about the relationship of nature to itself, materials, man and nature. So, thank you.